Meeting is called to order at 7:32. FMP has a quorum. The first order of business on the joint meeting is to discuss and take action on a resolution to appropriate the sum of $110,000 to hire a consulting firm to assist in the filing of applications for funding from FEMA. That has passed the Board of Selectmen and passed the Board of Finance on their meeting on November 16th. So, public health and safety is number one, because this is being generated out of the emergency management. Which court? Mark McEwen is off today, otherwise he would have joined us on this. Jim, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, Jack, Wayne Fox is on the call, and he offered just to do a quick little synopsis of kind of reiterate the memorandum he wrote on November 16th. Really encapsulates the whole thing.
Yes, thank you, Mac.
Sure.
This is an issue which had come to my attention, which a couple of questions were raised, both by Jim and by Monica. And we have two different scenarios. We have one which is called the Hazardous Mitigation Grant Program. That is separate and distinct from what is commonly referred to as the Independent Program, Assistance Program. With respect to one, it goes to the municipality. With respect to two, it doesn't. They don't need a municipality. People can apply for that directly. Well, the whole purpose of that grant is much more limited, relates to things such as necessities that people may not be able to afford because of the dire consequences in which they live. With respect to the historic maintenance hazardous mitigation grant programs, the city has a role to play in that. The city is considered a sub-agent, subcontractor, if you will, sub-applicant. Now, with respect to the money we're talking about this evening, technically for that assistance, one does not need, and the municipality is not required to enter into that kind of an agreement or to provide that kind of money. They do have a role to play once the grant is approved, and the homeowners need the municipality to apply for the HMGP. And once funding is approved, the local community is responsible for managing the sub-grant to ensure the scope of work, the work schedule, and the budget are consistent with the approved application. So with respect to the money we're talking about this evening, we certainly have the right to do it. We do not have the obligation to do it. I think that's a basic distinction.
Regrets for my tardiness.
Jack, we've lost you on the sound, or at least I have.
Yeah, because I muted myself. The dog was panting. So there was a big discussion at the Board of Finance on this, and there's two ways to look at this. One way is that we're going to be paying to help people with their application. Currently, the applications are being done by the Director of Emergency Management, Mark McEwen, and from his information, it takes between 2 to 3 weeks of total times to put one of these together. One of the thought processes are that rather than hiring another FTE, that the consultants would be used for those that want to apply for this. The funds, if approved, will be put into a town fund and will be drawn down as needed. Important to note from my conversations with Jim Palin, and he can nod his head and add if he wants to, if we're helping somebody with an application, it does not commit the town to go through with the with purchasing a property. So there's two things that are going on here. The first is that we can help somebody raise their home. And in that particular case, the town has responsibility, once the grant is approved, for monitoring the grant, ensuring that the work that is said to be done has been done, and then requesting the release of funds. The other one is if a home has had claims in excess of 50% of its value, then most likely FEMA is going to say they're not interested in raising the home at this time. They're probably going to suggest that it be purchased. Again, that doesn't commit the town for agreeing to that. So that's some additional information. And, I'm going to hand it over to Mac, and people who have questions, Mac will recognize you and we can go from there.
Jim, could you just, Jim Palin, could you just add a little color of the Board of Finance, what your thoughts were?
Yes, and Jack, I think you gave a great summary. The one thing I would just sort of add is, when a resident comes forward and they decide that they want to try to apply for the grant, at the time that they actually apply, they either check the box for a grant where the federal government would pay for 75% of the cost to raise their home, or they check another box where the federal government would pay for, where FEMA, would pay for 75% of the cost, pay for 75% of the appraised value for the town to purchase the property. At the time that they apply, that, ultimately Monica signs that application on behalf of the homeowner and sends it in, as Jack points out, the only thing we're committing to as it relates to raising the home is that the town will sort of oversee and report back with certain updates and so forth, certain progress reports back to FEMA. If a resident chooses to apply for FEMA to pay 75% of the appraised value towards the town's acquisition, it does not commit the town, the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, RTM, to purchase that home. That only occurs if it were to be approved and it comes back and it goes through all three different boards. And I think, certainly, Wayne and Monica and others that we spoke to said that to the extent residents do choose, and there could be one or two that choose to apply to have their home acquired and effectively demolished and used as open space, that they would make very clear to them that their application, just because the town's facilitating their application, doesn't commit any of these bodies 1, 2, 3 years down the road to purchase the home. That would always be at a sort of case-by-case basis.
Yeah, if I might add to what you said, one thing to remember is that if a home is going to be purchased, the total price includes demolition of the property and returning it to its natural state. It's not an option to keep that home there for a long period of time or any period of time. To participate in this program, the house must be demolished and the land cannot be built on again. Done. In the deed.
Jack, is that
I'm
done
sorry,
by
Jim.
restrictive covenant in the deed?
I would assume so, but it's part of the, Wayne can answer that better than I can.
That would be correct.
Yep.
Thank you.
And what does that mean, Jack?
By restrictive covenant in the deed, it says that that land has to be fallow. It's pure open space.
You can't build another home on it.
Right, we can't build another home. Now, we can use it for flood gathering, for pooling, for flood mitigation. We can use it, if it's a nice place, people can walk in the park there and other things like that, like as a park, use it for open space. But it cannot have another building or structure on that property.
Yeah.
The land is
Any
owned by the
future-
town?
Yes,
Even if anybody bought it after the town, they would also be bound by that restriction going forward.
That is also accurate.
it's very similar to when we do affordable housing and they're making certain units into the affordable housing. It's done by a 40-year restrictive covenant. So at least for 40 years, those units are restricted to be nothing but affordable housing.
Mac, are you taking questions yet?
Yes. I also had a question for Jack about the actual timing of the 110,000. Is this for this fiscal year? And then as we prepare the budget for next year, we would be getting another 110,000 in that budget?
Initially, we thought that this might be for this fiscal year, and then what wasn't used would be returned to the general fund, and then we'd see it in a line item in the budget. However, Jen Chinesky at the Board of Finance meeting mentioned that she would move this into a reserve fund, a restricted reserve fund solely for this use. And therefore we would not suspect to see it as a line item in the budget. And it would stay there until such time that the Board of Finance determined that it was no longer necessary, and then it would be returned to the general. Closing that fund then would also require RTM approval.
I have a question. Is there a risk of spending the $110,000 and not meeting the deadline, given the holidays, the number of applications, the length? I mean, is there that risk?
There are, I'll let Wayne add to this because he says it better than I do. But there is a January 12th deadline that was in the memorandum. But there are other deadlines that will be coming up throughout the year. Wayne can explain how that occurs.
I was
I've already
specifically
learned
referring
more.
to the January. If you don't make the January 12th deadline, then is the opportunity to submit the initial application null and void?
No, I think
No.
the answer to that is no. It is anticipated from what I have been told and from what we have learned that date will be a floating date. That's the one they're using now, but it is expected it will be expanded and continued.
And frequently what happens, this is, as Wayne explained in the Board of Finance, and I thought it was appropriate. If there's a tornado that hits Fairfield and the president designates Fairfield County a disaster area because they're not just doing a single town, that opens up funds for a whole myriad of these type of programs. So it's not just simply, oh, you had to be affected by the tornado in order to apply for new hazard mitigation funds.
And we have met that declaration. We have been so qualified and declared to be an area where there has been this disaster that has occurred.
Martha?
Couple of questions for Wayne. Is there any program other than this HMGP whereby homeowners can apply for money to elevate their house?
As I mentioned earlier and in my memo, there are other programs such as the direct application for funding, which is smaller and much more limited. These hazard mitigation grant programs are much more, it comes much more money, much more people, and are much greater than that individual assistance program.
And I guess, and you're not necessarily up on, but there are a number of houses that have been raised in the Norotan Bay area.
That is true, I'm aware of that.
Were those structures raised with funds from FEMA, or were those homeowners that just decided to fund the elevation themselves? Does anybody know?
I'm sorry, I have seen those homes, we've been by them, we are aware of them, but I am not familiar with how they were funded and whether they were specifically funded through this hazard mitigation program.
Okay.
Hey, Martha, it's Jim here. I asked the same question and I was told that there was one application probably 13 years ago for a home to be raised that Darien followed through with. That homeowner chose not to actually move forward and raise it. But the ones down in Norotan Bay weren't funded through this hazard mitigation grant program. Those were funded by the homeowners individually. I think, and Wayne, correct me if I'm wrong here, but Martha, for something to qualify for this, FEMA needs to look at the losses that specific property has been incurring over the past 5, 10, 15 years. And FEMA needs to believe that by funding 75% of raising the home, that's going to prevent sort of future losses. My understanding is that those homes down in Norotan Bay did not qualify for that, but some were raised anyway.
You are correct. That is a factor that they look at. I think the property you're alluding to is a property over on Cherry Road, Cherry Lane, in that area that was in fact up for acquisition and demolition. That would go back about 10 years, as I recall.
Mac,
Yes,
Jim Cameron, can I ask a quick question?
sure, absolutely.
Okay. And this is probably directed mostly to Jack and Jim Palin, because it's really a financial question, and an opinion too. While I am sympathetic to the people who are victims of flooding, if we believe in global warming, is this not a trend which is going to continue? And if the town sets what at least I see as a precedent for helping our neighbors go through whatever process, either with full-time employees or with consultants, are we prepared to make that commitment, not just for these individuals, but for years going forward with a growing number of potential applicants?
So I'll give the first opinion and then Jim can give his as well as Wayne.
Thanks, Jeff.
First, some of us do believe in science and global warming exists. Okay. So we can start there that yes, there is a very good chance that flooding will continue. Second, according to Wayne, this does not set a precedent at all. The last part I'll say is that in our meeting when we were looking at 27 Crimmins, Peter Orfanos raised, and the committee had a good discussion, F&B, about establishing some criteria from the land management departments, boards, and commissions, because definitely F&B isn't qualified to do that. But and suggested that be established. And that's not a 1 week effort. That's going to take some time to do. Interesting enough, the same conversation occurred at the Board of Finance in discussion. And for that, I'm going to pass off to Jim.
Yeah, Jack, I would say we asked the same questions. Does us committing to spend $110,000 to help somewhere between 8 and 12 residents apply for this grant commit us to do it in the future? Does it commit us to actually buy a property to the extent that homeowner is actually applying for an acquisition or demolition reimbursement from FEMA? And I think the answer, I think, was clearly no. I think when we think about the quantum of $110,000, which is certainly not a small number, but I think in light of the fact that we knew of 2 applications that have gone through, one in 2009 and then the one in 2019, which the town decided to purchase the land, a few months ago. We view this as sort of a one-time spike as a result of, a lot of the flooding that we've seen over this past year, and still unsure to see how many of these 10 to 15 homes that Mark McEwen and staff identified as potential applicants actually move forward and apply, because it is a significant investment by the homeowner to pay their 25%, and there is no guarantee that the town would actually purchase the property. So I think my view, and I think I would represent that of our board, is that we looked at this as $110,000 to help these residents who've experienced significant damage in recent storms and prior storms get to the point where they can decide whether or not it makes sense and they want to, and whether they're able to apply and whether or not they're accepted. To the extent, to Jim Cameron's question, we started seeing the quantum of applications jump, and particularly the quantum of applications related to acquisitions. I think we would really have to pause and think sort of as a town, as representatives of all of the residents of Darien, what's the best policy to design if this is going to possibly be a larger expenditure move going down the road. So I think this was, I was comfortable with the 110, being able to help, these residents kind of get to a point where they can apply and see if they can receive federal aid. But to the extent this starts, significantly expanding and the potential cost of applicants, I think we'd really need to sit down and decide, how much of our resources we can dedicate towards these type of applications and/or, potential acquisitions.
If I might add to what
Yeah.
Jim
Let me
said,
just add to that quick. Go ahead, Jack. I'm sorry.
all I wanted to add to that is that's part of the reason why the Board of Finance and us said it's not just what qualifies somebody to potentially apply for this, but what's the strategic value of certain homes? Are they meeting the strategic value of the town in flood mitigation? And that's part of the criteria that only the land use boards and the Board of Selectmen, who's established policy, can do. We can request it, but again, it's not a 1 week exercise. It's a couple months for them to really go through that. So,
Jack, just to amplify that, that's where we started back at the earlier meeting, was to try to make sure that we weren't setting precedent and coming up with some general criteria so that nobody down the road can make if a claim is denied, they can come back and say something is arbitrary and capricious and try to create a duty when there is none.
well, I also think if you watch the Board of Finance meeting, the Board of Finance came to, and I don't mean to speak about for Jim's board, but I think that was pretty much the same conclusion that the Board of Finance had as well. Wayne, you wanted to make comment?
Just let me add, I agree with the comments that Jack made and the comments that Jim made. This is, I think one member of the Board of Finance looked upon it and was of the opinion it may be a moral obligation, but it is not a legal obligation. We spend money, we appropriate money all the time on a regular basis from year to year for one project that we deem to be appropriate at that time. That doesn't bind us to spend money on a similar project down the road. Here is a one-time decision, one-time obligation. We are not and we will not be bound in the future to apply similar funds for each individual that comes before us.
Not at least on a
also
legal
wanna
basis, perhaps, but morally, as you point out.
Correct.
The political obligation to do for others what we have done for some, perhaps. Just an opinion.
Fair question.
Thank you.
I agree.
Thank you, Jim.
I also want to maybe have a slight turn on this. And I know everybody keeps on talking about we're helping homeowners. I have an opinion that we're helping the town, and not because of the applications or the flood mitigation. Right now we have our deputy fire marshal, who's also our emergency manager, spending significant time working on these type of issues. At the same time, we have several buildings that are going up, and this is one of the individuals that responsible for doing the inspections that the town receives funding for making sure that the fire and the alarms and everything else that is supposed to be done, not only for the 3 projects, but also for Oxbridge School and other things that go along. So I look at this as that we are, instead of hiring an FTE or allocating some of this gentleman's time, we're actually hiring consultants to do the work who have expertise in it, which will take less time, and we're still not having to pay for benefits and the like. And we're only going to use the funds for those that are there. There's other things that can come down the road that look at it, but I look at it as saving some FTE time and allocating it. And based upon a conversation that Jim and I had earlier, got to remember, if somebody's going to raise their home, the town does get fees associated with that. building fees, inspection fees, and other things like that in the normal course of business, similar to any building that would be done. So just a different way to look at this, as opposed to simply we're helping 10 residents.
Yeah, Jack, to echo your point there, I think we view this as sort of a way to meet surge demand for town services in terms of applying on behalf of these residents and so forth. That you're right, we don't want to bring on a full team, FTE, pay for pensions, healthcare, this and that for what could be a short 6-month surge in applications.
Yeah, Lois?
I noticed that there was a number of 192,000 in some of the documents, and that what we're looking at is a partial thing. I'm not sure that 190,000 changes our decision, but I wasn't sure about that extra 100,000, that extra 90,000, how that's going to apply. And I think I have the sense that it's going to depend on how many people want to go forward and how far we go, and that the town would come back to us to get more money. But I'd be interested in hearing how that plays out in some of the discussions that have already been had.
Jim, I'll pass that to you.
Yeah, Lois, the contract was really scheduled as a not to exceed $196,000, and basically what these folks from I believe it's called Dewberry looked at. They looked at all the different homes that have reached out to Mark and could have potentially applied. Based on some initial work, they whittled that down until those that they think would actually apply, and those that, if they applied, Lois, would either be approved for raising a home or for an acquisition of a home. And they basically, the 196 was a not to exceed to bring all of those homes through the application process. And then if it was to demolish, if the town were to go forward and acquire it, how much it would cost to oversee that. And if they were to go forward with raising the home, the next sort of 18 to 24 months of sort of project management, if you will. Not necessarily choosing the color of the house, but overseeing and making sure that everything was the way it was built and raised, sort of met FEMA conditions. That's what that 196 was for. So it could be the case that only 7 apply and only 2 are approved, of which the town would spend a lot less money. And kind of back to the earlier point, we're only, what's in front of you now is an appropriation for 110, which would bring all these residents to the point of applying and submitting it. To the extent, the town saw how many were going to be submitted, and they saw that was going to put us in a larger financial obligation. I think, Monica and the Board of Selectmen and staff have committed to keep us posted on how these things are evolving, so that we can understand how much more, if any, of the difference between 110 and 196 we would need to pay. But and to the point of what's happening with this money, I think Mac asked, it will go into an account, what I call sort of a non-lapsing account. So if they don't incur all of the sort of hourly and event charges underneath this contract before June 30th of 2022, it'll just continue to stay appropriated, and they can use that for years to come until such time that the Board of Finance were to kind of shut down the account.
Or F&B comes in and says, hey, don't you want to shut down this account? So one of the two of those will occur.
Correct.
Thank you, Jim.
You're welcome.
Martha.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment. It sounds like the January 12 date is not a drop dead date, that there's a floating date. And to Jim's comment, while this may not set legal precedent, I think it sort of does set a moral precedent if we continue on. We've done this for Crimmins and some other homes. Since January 12th is not drop dead, I really think that we should not pursue this until the town has developed a plan or a policy with respect to how it wants to move on these types of applications. And my thought is, there's been mentioned, many of these applications, people will probably be looking to raise their house, but it's been mentioned that a couple are looking for demolition. Why would you want to pay a consultant to go through the process when you don't know yet whether or not you're willing to pay for what might be an accepted demolition. It just makes no sense to me. So I would firmly urge that the town, and you know, I know it can't be done overnight, but I would think between now and, I don't know, early in the year, a policy should be developed, and then we can move forward.
I'm going to say one thing on that, and then I'll let Jim go. I know Jim said, well, we'll find out that, you know, if we need more money. I tend to believe we're going to need less money. I'm familiar with somebody who's looking to raise their home now who would not qualify for FEMA. And when people realize that with the project management that they need to hire, with the construction and everything else, what the cost of raising this is, and that they're going to be responsible for 25%, a lot of people go, you know, it's nice that FEMA's paying 75. I'm not sure I even want to pay the 25.
You
And
know,
so that's part of the reason people have not followed through with this in the past. So I don't think we're going to spend the 110, honestly.
you know, to me, this is not a financial issue. It's a policy issue. You have to have a policy, and then you decide, you know, whether you need to hire a consultant if you want to, and if you want to hire a consultant. That's my feeling.
Hey, Martha, your point on policy, I think, is very well received. I think, you know, when we looked at this, the federal government has committed billions and billions of dollars to help homeowners, you know, whether it be floods or tornadoes or other sort of natural earthquakes and other disasters, to be able to kind of repair and or mitigate their home for future hazards. And it's, you know, it's applaudable that the federal government has this program, but the way that they've set it up is that the only way that homeowners can benefit from it is to work through their local municipality or tribunal or other authority to kind of to get there. So unfortunately, like other sort of federal and state programs, the town sort of stuck there to sort of play its part, and as we're seeing here, sort of incur some type of expense, whether that be hiring staff or just existing staff time or other resources, or in this case, kind of going outside for consultants to be able to sort of help our homeowners. What I will say is that when you think about this program, FEMA is only doing this, is only allowing homes or only supporting homes to be raised that it thinks is in its FEMA's financial best interest. FEMA thinks by paying 75% of X dollars that they're going to save money down the road. And likewise, when you think about a resident, Martha, who decides to do this, if I'm going to raise my home and my share is $100,000, right? If I raise my home, it will reduce my flood premiums from perhaps $4,000 a year to $100 a year. Like, there could be significant savings, but for that homeowner, that's a long-term investment. You're paying a big chunk up front now, 25%, to receive, you know, obviously, you know, saving your home, but also receive financial savings over 10, 20 years from now. And that's sort of a big investment. So to Jack's point, how many of these actual homeowners actually go through with this, I think will be, it's yet to see. Part of, as you read through the whole proposal that Jamie and then Monica and Kate and team negotiated with Dewberry, the first couple events on that are, I don't have it in front of me, but $4,000 to $5,000 to have like a community public information session where everybody, whether it's 10, 20, 30 people, want to come down and sort of learn about how these grants work and sort of get the information out there. I think that natural process will probably weed out some people who aren't natural fits for it. The second part, I think task 2 was more individual conversations with, you know, any of us that might have questions. You know, again, another, I think, $4,000 or $5,000. You know, I think the way that they've set up the proposal, you know, to Jack's earlier point, will give people a lot of information and probably weed out a number of people that aren't really wed to going, you know, kind of marching down this long path here. But those that do, and this will significantly benefit them, and they're willing to make the investment, to raise their home. I think it's, it's kind of us playing our moral part to help them get access to a huge federal program. On the acquisition of the homes, and Wayne, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the way the grant works is FEMA says it'll pay the homeowner 75% of the fair market value of their home for the town to acquire it. The town can then pay the remaining 25% of that home at fair market value. They can pay 20%. They can pay 15%. They're not required to pay the full 25% of that difference. It's really what FEMA is committing to pay 75% of the fair market value plus, sort of certain, demolition and repurposing costs.
That is correct.
Jack, this is Bert. I think some of the discourse we're having tonight is because there's some deeper issues. How much does the federal government or the state government, for that matter, get involved in these situations? And so we are now deciding about $110,000, which is a ridiculously low amount, but we're looking at the broader spectrum, what is happening now and what can happen in the future. And, you buy a home on the water and it goes up in value, terrific. But for some reason, the water table rises and you lose money on your investment. One guy is lucky, it's a little higher, and he gets 10 times what he invested in the house, and the other guy is lost and goes to the government. So what we're struggling with is, what is the role of the government in all of this, and what is the role of the municipal government in all of that? And yes, $110,000 is fine. We're all going to approve of that. I just want everyone to see the bigger spectrum. Things are changing. When everything goes wrong, we look for the government. If everything goes right with our money, I'm troubled with that.
Well, let me I just want to make sure everybody's at the same level. So we're using the right terms and so we understand. The applicant for any of these FEMA grants happens to be the state. The sub-applicant happens to be the town, municipality, Indian territory, or government agency. So we're the sub-applicant. And if you want to call it the sub-applicant is the homeowner. Now, I am familiar with one instance where after Superstorm Sandy, the federal government did want to try and recover some of their funds. So on second homes, they've been raising the rates by 10%. So somebody that I know is paying under $1,000 because they raised their home. And had they not raised their home, their FEMA insurance would have been $9,000. They're aware that several people, because of that cost, have chosen not to insure under FEMA, and they can do that if they do not have a mortgage. If you have a mortgage, mortgage law requires it after the floods that happened in Mississippi, where the whole valley was flooded. So there is a payback, but it can be substantial funds to go do it in substantial time. So I agree with what Jim said. I think we have been doing this before in both of the applications where we had a house purchased in 2009 and just recently, our emergency management personnel helped. We have a lot more of them now. It's a drain on the resource, and that's why I look at it more as this is a service that we're providing, but it also reduces the cost. And quite honestly, if we have flooding in these areas again, that incurs additional costs to the town that if homes are raised, we do not have that same cost or need for having people go there in boats to bring people out. So That's just a perspective on this. And I agree, we've all said we want a policy. So with Martha, I agree with that. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm thinking about this. When somebody builds a new house, they have to hire engineers to design a water mitigation system or a water containment system, and they have to pay for it. Now, I understand the town is the sub-applicant, but I still go with the need for a policy first. But, I would consider, it's like you're going to sell your home or you're going to buy a home, you have to pay some of the upfront costs to apply for certain things. Applying for a building permit, you have to pay the upfront costs on designing a system. Here, maybe homeowners in a flood area have to pay the upfront cost. And yes, if the town has to process the application, maybe the town should be paid for that. And we keep talking about the town paying, but it's really the taxpayers, all of the taxpayers that are paying. So that's why I think there's a real need for a policy here.
Well, I agree with you on the policy wholeheartedly. We said that in September in our RTM report on 27 criminals. As a committee, we said that.
Right, but why aren't we doing that now? Why can't we delay this until we come up with a real policy?
Well, hey, Martha, just to share, I think the way the Board of Finance thought about this is, we've had two applications, one in 2009 and one in 2019, one to raise and one to acquire. And we don't really know what we don't know yet. So my opinion is we're likely going to go through 4, 6, 8 different applications here. I think we're going to learn a little bit more about what the process really involves, the likelihood of it, and so forth. And I think what will come out of this process, and not that I look at spending $110,000 lightly, but I think we'll know more as we get moving through this and how it works and how residents apply and how people make choices and so forth, to give us more information to make, I think, a more educated and informed kind of long-term policy decision. I think when it comes to acquiring homes, I think each home really if it ever got to that, which is likely 1, 2, 3 years from now, it's going to have to be a sort of case-by-case basis. It's going to depend on where homes are, the values, what the possible benefits are, what other types of flood mitigation strategies staff and the Board of Selectmen and our consultants might find through some of the other work they're doing and so forth. But I think, I think these first handful here, I think are going to be a little bit of a real learning experience for staff and for others here. And we just don't have the resources to handle it in-house.
Jim, I concur with what you're saying in concept, but I think the risk that Martha's worried about, and I share, is when we start going down the case-by-case approach without some set of standards and a set policy, it will give people who get denied a grounds to be able to say, well, gee whiz, the town approved properties A, B, and C, and D, but not E and F, and darn it, maybe we should sue the town because of that. I think that's what we're concerned about. I understand where you're going, that we've taken it as it comes, but I agree with Martha, but maybe we should try to affirmatively tell authority is to actually start working on this.
Well, Peter, I do agree with you as it relates to acquisitions, which I think the earliest we could ever see one in front of us would probably be a year from now, just based on how long it takes to apply and approve and all of that. Before we look at any more acquisitions, I think we absolutely do need to sort of have a policy, much the same way we do in the sort of plan of the 10-year plan of, I think it's what's called conservation and development, where we decide to kind of buy homes, or we consider, I should say, properties that are granted usable open space or adjacent to other properties and so forth. And we have, certain sort of parameters. I think before we purchase any other homes, which none of this 110,000 is committing us to do it, we really need to have a policy in place. But I think we probably have a year before we're there.
Well, and that's what I think is
But by
important.
that,
The first half is easy for saying, here's what would qualify for a home to be raised or to be demolished. That's the easy part. It comes right from FEMA. The second part is the strategic part, which Jim was talking about. And I actually think that, you know, we go forth with the 110, and what we do is we request that, you know, this is a policy that's developed. Do we, I haven't spoken to Monica to see when and if she could have this done. I've spoken to Kate. Kate seemed agreeable to this. She was agreeable to this at the Board of Finance meeting. So that's about the best I can say. Jen. Jenny?
Oh, question on the plan, excuse me, I have no voice. The plan of conservation and development, when does that get updated? Is that every 10 years or every 5 years?
Wayne, you can answer that. I think it's every 10.
I think it's 10.
I believe that's correct.
Okay. For me, that's probably the best indicator of a policy or a direction with regard to these kinds of acquisition matters is, you know, does it fall into criteria somewhere around, you know, conservation usually?
Which is why
Jack, since I was part of the last 10-year plan of development, it's every 10 years, and the last one was done in 2015. It starts in 2016, so the next one is 2025 being developed and starting in 2026.
right, and that's part of the reason why F&B specifically stated that to establish this criteria, it's the land use management boards, commissions, and departments who are responsible for that plan to be developing the strategic aspects of it going forward. So it's embedded in the plan as well, and that it be brought to the Board of Selectmen and approved by the Board of Selectmen to establish policy. But we can only request that.
Jack, I am sorry that Mark couldn't be on the call tonight, but it's really, this falls on his shoulders. Is that correct?
It falls on his shoulders only with the applications, not for the plan. The plan is still going to be with Jeremy and the land use boards. In fact, before we actually do any acquisition, if you recall, Amy reported from PZ&H because there's a document that had to be issued by the P&Z department and approved by the commission. Wayne, you may recall what the exact name is on the document. I don't, but Wayne, what's the name of the document they have to give us?
That, I believe, is referenced, Jack, in the motion. It was a Planning and Zoning Commission issued a report that the proposal was consistent with the 216 Town Plan of Conservation Development. That's it's actually in the resolution.
It is in the resolution, and they did so on September 7th, 2021 for Crimmins. That's exactly what it is, Wayne. So, so yes, it always has to be consistent, but again, you know, we handle financial things here, and where we need policy to help us decide financial, that's fine. But F&B has no desire to get involved with what the criteria needs to be. That's outside of our lane, far outside of it.
Let me just ask of my committee, does anyone else have any more comments or questions? Okay. So Jack, why don't we go ahead and do our vote?
Right.
And
we'll vote
then because you have other things to discuss.
Yeah, we do.
Let me first ask for any no votes.
Well, first, can we have somebody move the motion? Because
Yeah,
neither one of us did that mistakenly.
Yep, I always do that.
I do too.
Jim, you want to give us a motion?
Jim Cameron? Sure.
Sure.
I'd like to move the question as presented and discussed in the past 45 minutes. Period.
Okay, do we have a second? Okay, Lois. Okay. All voting against this?
Aye.
Aye.
On this-
Martha,
we're
you
just
get to vote for us, not on them.
Just doing public health.
Okay,
and safety. Okay.
It's up.
So, okay.
Okay.
So, Jim is a no. Any others? Any abstentions? Robbie, did you?
Yeah, I'm voting in favor of the $100,000.
Okay, that's fine. I just, so it's not an abstention. Okay. So I'm going to assume that everyone else is in favor. Okay, thank you.
All right, and I want to thank our committees do a lot of joint things together. We should keep this up. They're good meetings. But I want to thank everyone from Public Health and Safety for doing this. And so now we'll take, can I have somebody move the motion?
I just want to jump in too and just also thank Wayne Fox for being on the call and also Jim Palin. Thank you.
Good night, gentlemen.
I'd like to
Ladies.
move that the Public Health and Safety meeting be adjourned.
Second, all in favor? Okay. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Great meeting. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Okay, for those who are left from F&B, can I have somebody move the motion by showing the hand? I have Jenny. Do we have a second? I have Louisa. Okay. Are there any no's? Now, Martha, you can raise your hand.
Yes. No, rather.
I will be, when I do the write-up, I'm going to give you a look so that I can make sure that I'm properly articulating a minority report.
Okay.
On this one, I think it's important that it's properly articulated. Are there any abstentions? Everyone else is in favor. So motion passes. I'm going to quickly move to the next item on our agenda. Actually, I want to do one because I think it's real easy to do. If you recall, we discussed the fact that the Board of Ed purchased certain new vehicles. And we voted in favor of the Board of Finance doing it either through a special appropriation or using the reserve fund for capital non-recurring item capital reserve. That's what they chose to use it from. The funds have now been, the insurance funds proceeds for $82,741 has actually come in. It was actually higher than what we anticipated. The agreement is that when the funds come in from it was deposited into the general fund, and now it's important to move it from the general fund back into the reserve fund for capital non-recurring assets, capital reserve, so that so only the net of the vehicles are being taken from that, which was the original plan. Any questions on that? Any discussions? If not, can I have somebody move that motion? I don't know what the number is yet. I have Peter moving. Do we have a second? I have Beth as a second. Are there any no's? They're seeing none. Are there any abstentions? Everybody else carries. Motion passes. Thank you. So here's the next one. The next one is that there's a change in what the appropriation has to be for 27 Crimmins because towns are required to pay the full amount and then be reimbursed from FEMA after the after the expenses are done. So there would be a house closing after we do the demolition. There's the demolition cost return. There's costs associated with coming up with the appraisal and other things like that. And we're supposed to be paid back on a quarterly basis. But that amends the original motion from 160 plus change to be a total appropriation of $669,100. There is no net change to the amount that the town has to pay out. If anything, it could be less if some of these costs are less. We just have to change the appropriation. The new amended appropriation that I sent out that Wayne was so kind to write up. The important things is that Planning and Zoning did its approval, Board of Selectmen did its, Board of Finance did this, and again approved the higher appropriation on November 16th. And the town approved the purchase on September 27th. And so I'm just going to go for the last three. Whereas earlier this month, the town was informed that FEMA has changed the procedure for the acquisition. The town will need to appropriate the entire purchase price, which includes demolition and the other costs. And whereas the town will need to front the full acquisition cost of $609,100, will be reimbursed by FEMA for its share of 75% of the cost. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the RTM and the town of Darien hereby appropriates the sum of $669,100 for the acquisition, which includes demolition of 27 Crimmins Road, subject to the reimbursement from FEMA, and their amount will be $501,825. So before us, we're the only one reporting on this because it's basically an accounting entry. There's no change to anything else associated with this. And one of the other things that we have done is in the past, the RTM has not done business in either November. Once I remember we did business in December. Those days are over. We have to be responsive to what the needs of the town and the Board of Ed are. And so I happen to run into the director of At Home in Darien, who was just excited from what the RTM did and this committee did in taking the lead on pushing that forward. This is one of those things. The anticipated closing is in January. So is there any discussion or questions on this?
Yes, Jack, it is true that you said it's only an accounting issue. It is an accounting issue, but it's also a cash flow issue. Having said that, just because we have to advance the money earlier than anticipated and it comes back later from the government, there's a cash flow impact. However, the cash flow impact is zero because we're not earning any interest on the money that we keep. I just want to be straight. Okay. Thank you.
Somehow I knew we were getting there, Bert. I'm just going to smile at that and know that I'm going to get a phone call later. But yes, right now we're not earning anything anyway in any of the funds that are going on. So, and fortunately, we do have the funds available. And we know we're going to get paid back, or as I said in a memo earlier to a couple people discussing this, and Wayne was on that, If you don't think we're going to be paid back from the federal government, then I suggest you sell all your stocks and buy gold and crypto currency. So this is, we are going to get paid. Hopefully we get paid at the end of the first quarter, the calendar quarter, our third quarter. Any other
Yeah.
comments? Yes, Jenny.
Yeah, and it should be noted that the more quickly we act and the town can start processing, the more quickly the turnaround time can be for reimbursement.
Yes, and get the demolition done. Because again,
Right.
this isn't the town deciding to demolish. This is a FEMA requirement that that home will be demolished. And I have a commitment that we're not going to have another Egerton where half the foundation is still in the ground. Because I don't want to
Amen.
have that meeting again either. Beth, I saw your hand raised.
I just wanted to make sure that we do have evidence somewhere of the newly promulgated FEMA rule that changes how the reimbursement works.
As I said, this question was raised over the weekend. I sent it to Kate. Kate didn't have it. I sent something to Mark McEwen, who's off today. But he did check in and send me an email that he is going and getting the documentation for us that we should have available.
I tried to Google it, but I had very imprecise search terms, so it was garbage.
Beth, I'm going to tell you that that's an easier comment than you said. I have read more FEMA documents and websites and new regulations than I've ever wanted to read in my life. I was on the phone for 30 minutes with FEMA people, and they were laughing because this is not the FEMA questions that are typically asked. I spoke to a supervisor, and I finally gave up, and Mark said he's giving me the documents, and I was more than happy with that statement to return to my day so I could plan Thanksgiving dinner instead of learning more about FEMA than I want to know.
Jack,
Peter.
I'd like to ask, this is for future business. I would like to find out what we need to do to, I guess we don't have authority per se, but start the policy process on this whole topic, so that as it was, I think Jim Palin stated, if maybe we're a year out from another acquisition. Policy takes time. Let's start it now so that we're ready for it.
We can, typically I have a meeting in December where we talk about things, and maybe I'll ask Monica if she wishes to join us in her new role, as I provided other information to her on something else, just in case you want to make comments on At Home at Darien, and said, look, F&B is always here to help you out, and please remember that when we ask questions on your budget.
I share Martha's concerns.
Yes, I think we all do. And I shared that with the Board of Finance and with that. So perhaps if not, we can have Kate here and get a commitment from Kate that that policy is underway. I think that's the best we can do.
Good enough.
All right, are we ready to vote on this? Or are there any did we move this? No, we did not. So I need somebody to move it.
I'll be happy to move it.
Okay, I see Bert moving it. And second, is that Beth? Or, Barry. We're going to have Barry soon. He's spreading this around. All right, are we ready to vote? Are there any no votes? Seeing none, are there any abstentions? Seeing none, motion carries. Wayne, thank you very much for your assistance. I want to go.
You're welcome.
I want to go on one other thing. I'm trying to integrate all of the various boards, their meetings, and the budget, which takes time. But more importantly is I'm going to be sending out an email to know what days don't work for you, so that if we have to have, when I'm doing the scheduling for F&B meetings, I mean, I want to know that if, two people are working and Wednesdays don't work, let me know, because we're not meeting on Wednesdays. We have a small committee, and so I want to make sure that we have the greatest participation. I intend, because I know some people will be traveling during the winter months, to remain virtual at least as long as we can. We're allowed to do this through April, but that's good. I know most people have been vaccinated, had their boosters, I just got my flu shot today. So that's not the issue. It's just that it's a lot easier. So my next question is, what time works best? In the past when we were meeting, we were doing 8 o'clock. I'm more interested on the people that are working still, for what works for you, because people like myself just means that I have a little bit more time for dinner before we have a meeting. So I'll be sending out an email on that, and then getting back. I sent out 2 minutes, so we can do these both at the same time. I believe Jenny, do you have what the dates of those minutes were, please? You mute, yeah.
Where'd it go?
When is October 27th?
It was the 14th, I think.
October
Okay.
14 and 20.
Super. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes? I'm assuming
Before
nobody's
you
going
do
to
that,
make any.
Jack, so we're not taking action on the meeting schedule. It's just
No,
that's
I
not a
want
motion.
information, and then I'll get it back. But then in the past, we've had a December meeting by inviting either Kate or Jen to spend some time with us. I know at tonight's Board of Selectmen meeting, Kate and Jen are meeting with the Board of Selectmen to make sure that if there's any projects that members are thinking beyond what was on the 5-year plan that the Board of Selectmen was using, that they hear about it now as opposed to during the budget time, so we don't run into an Egerton again. And specifically because of Egerton, they want to have upfront notification of projects that may be out on the horizon. And so there's also going to be a change in the accounting for Park and Rec that Jen referred to, because again, their revenue is exceeding what was in the budget, and obviously some expenses come in, and rather than making an adjustment at the end of the year, which we most probably will have to do this year, and we're smart enough to know to ask Park and Rec to give us that calculation before we meet. But to hear of any of the other changes that might be occurring and thought process. So I'll have something in December and go from there. So no, we're not going to go through the schedule at this time. Long answer for that, sorry. But can I have somebody to move the minutes, and then we can get done? Okay, I have Jenny moving the minutes. Do we have a second? I have Louisa. Are there any no's on the minutes? That's good, because I wrote them. You really should read them carefully if I wrote them. Do we have any abstentions? You can vote on it even if you weren't there. New Robert's Rules of Order. Okay, we take it, it passes. So now we can adjourn. Do we have a motion to adjourn? Peter, good boy. And do we have a second on that? I have Barry. All in favor of adjourning. Anybody who says no is foolish. Have a very nice Thanksgiving, everyone. Enjoy, and don't eat so much that you have to diet in December. So
Happy Thanksgiving.
have a good Thanksgiving.
Take care, everyone.
Take care.
Happy Thanksgiving.